comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case the Third. How are you, George?
I'm just fine, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Oh, it's going to be fun because we've got a house full of regulars. David Hubler,
Hi, good morning.
The Nats and Grays and the Grays. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Okay, Ronnie Rabinovich, who is the ambassador that keeps Jackie Robinson's legacy alive, at least in Minnesota. Ronnie Rabinovich, how are you, sir?
How you doing, Ralph? Hi, George.
Oh, good. I've got in my company 3 guys who are as old school lovers of baseball as ever there was. So we're going to play a little game today, and it's called Survey Says. I've got a little survey that I want to get your opinions on, and I'll ask you one by one. We'll start with Ronnie on this one. Who is in the Hall of Fame that shouldn't be? One person, if you can name one person. And who is excluded that should be in the Hall of Fame? Only one person, or a number of them. The person that stands out in your mind. Start with Ronnie.
Okay, I would say the one that should be in is Gil Hodges. No question about it. I think it's a travesty that he's not in. And let's see. The one that I think that should not be in, that's a good question. That one's, just give me a chance to check on that one, okay?
All right.
Happy Chandler. I'd say Happy Chandler.
Happy Chandler wasn't all that happy, in other words.
No, he wasn't. He
seemed happy by artificial stimulants?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'd say Happy
he was
Chandler.
nipping at a bong or perhaps a cocktail beverage.
Known in French as a mumser.
Okay.
Mumser, yeah. Mumser, right.
Yeah.
Another Yiddish lesson for George.
This isn't a right or wrong. Before we go to George, we will go to David Hubler.
Well, I think Happy Chandler is a really good example of someone who does not belong in the Hall of Fame. I agree with Ronnie on this one. He took over after Kennesaw Mountain Landis died. He wasn't really too thrilled with it. And he wasn't really, from everything I read, he wasn't such a big sports fan. He took the job, and he waited. He waited until he could, because he was in Congress at the time. And he did nothing to advance the game whatsoever. I think it was more like an honorarium that they voted him in. I wouldn't have voted him in any more than I can think of a couple of other commissioners who really didn't deserve it. But and Gil, everybody, Gil Hodges is like everybody's number one, I think, and it's hard to explain why he's had such a hard time breaking into the Hall of Fame when so many people are advocating for him with committees and postings and things like that. I think it's become a question of that the Old Timers Committee, which I don't even know if it exists or if it does in a different name. I think they've just become so obstinate about this that they're just saying no for the sake of saying no. And that's what people do sometimes. They realize their position is wrong, but they're not going to change it simply because everybody else tells them it's wrong.
Right.
Well, that is the worst human frailty that I know. And it goes in government, it goes in business, and it goes in the hierarchy of our religious experience, churches, synagogues, and what have you. People make mistakes in life, and things change, and most people have the hardest time saying, "I was wrong."
Yeah.
As if being wrong is going to crucify you. Oh my God, you were wrong. You mean you're human? you changed your mind, that kind of thing. And so I hear exactly what you're saying.
And I think that if George Steinbrenner had put his heft and influence behind Gil Hodges the way he did with Phil Rizzuto to get Rizzuto into the Hall of Fame, I mean, he twisted arms to get, and Rizzuto deserved to be in there in any case. But the point was that it took a strong personality like Steinbrenner to get them to open the door to Rizzuto. Unfortunately, there's been no one of that caliber to go to bat for Gil Hodges.
Right. And that's sad.
Yes.
What's really sad is that the poor guy dies so young. I don't think he's 50 years old.
Yeah, he had a heart attack on the golf course.
Yeah.
And they say he was dead before he hit the ground. He just...
Right.
He and Bing Crosby.
Yeah.
Did he die that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bing Crosby died on a golf course, too. Right.
That's a dangerous sport, man. I tell you.
Oh, I'll tell you a dangerous sport. Nelson Rockefeller will tell you a dangerous
Yeah, right. Yeah, he didn't even have his shoes on correctly.
Gee, you guys, now you're really bringing up stuff.
Oh, well.
We can digress very easily.
That's not baseball related, by the way.
Happy's going, I got the money, and I'm still alive. And, but that's we're all human.
Well, George, what are your picks?
Well, I agree with both you guys. First of all, on Happy Chandler, my dad knew Happy Chandler because he was commissioner when my father was playing. But that doesn't mean that I don't think, as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't belong in there. And I don't know another commissioner who was there. I guess Bud Selig's in there, and why, I can't tell you because, I'm not a proponent of all the stuff that he did with baseball, but Happy Chandler definitely. And when regard to Gil Hodges, I've been beating that drum for a long time. It's beyond me why he's not in there. I knew of him as a player. I knew of him as a manager. He did a great job, with Washington, with no talent. And then, a year later after he goes to the Mets, they're the miracle Mets. You could bring him in as a player or a manager as far as I'm concerned. And his playing career with the Dodgers was terrific. He anchored that whole team. And, to bring in, Ronnie knows, Jackie and Pee Wee and Campy and Snyder and those guys and to leave Gil Hodges off, to me, it's ridiculous.
Terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do you know, George, what the status is of the? I've heard there is no old timers committee anymore, and I don't know what I
think, David, what they've done, I think, is that they have different eras or something, and they've got a pre-integration or something. They've got a golden era. They got all kinds of stuff, but the old story was that Ted Williams kept Hodges off because of jealousy of, I don't think there's anything to that. I don't believe it. But the committees in the Hall of Fame, and maybe Ronnie knows more. I've been up there. I know some people at the Hall of Fame, but I can't figure out how they keep changing the committees all the time and who's on and who's not and how they get in and how they don't. Ronnie, do you have a better knowledge of it than I have?
Ron? Oh, we might have lost Ronnie. I hope you're okay,
no,
Ronnie.
I'm here.
Oh.
No, Ronnie, I was just asking you, David asked me about the Hall of Fame, about all the different committees, and I said, I really, at this point, I guess Gil Hodges would be part of the, old timers or Golden Age committee or whatever they call it, who's going to get him in. But, you know, to me, he's deserving. He should have been in a long, long time ago.
A long time ago. I just don't understand.
May I disagree with you, George, on something?
Yeah.
As great hitter as was Ted Williams, and as wonderful, an eclectic man, an interesting man, a great war hero, he did not allow Campy's vote to get Gil Hodges in the Hall of Fame. And Campy couldn't show up. He was sick. He was in the final stages of his life, and there was an old-timers meeting where his vote was denied, and that would have put Gil Hodges in. And for whatever it's worth, right, wrong, or indifferent, Washington took to Gil, and they didn't take to Ted Williams. And he was a tough act to follow, if you will. And
well, Gil, you know, Ralph, absolutely. I mean, I've heard that story about Ted and Campy and all that stuff, and that might very well be true, but that was a long time ago. Now, I don't know with regard to Washington. I know that certainly, you know, Ted Williams probably gave Washington the last winning season that they had in '69, I think it was. But Gil Hodges was certainly a much more affable, you know, outgoing person, and probably, you know, did become a lot closer to a lot of the sports writers and fans because of who he was.
I think it was a snide thing to do on Ted's part. Not that.
Well, I do. If that's true, Ralph, I agree. You know.
But what did he do? I mean, what did he actually do? Was he on the old timers committee?
Well, he was in charge of a committee, and because Roy Campanella, who was in the final stages of his life, he was in the hospital, could not physically attend the meeting to vote on whether Hodges should be in, and Ted refused the proxy vote, and it's an is. He simply denied Gil the opportunity to go in at that point.
I never heard that. I never heard that before.
Yeah, I had heard it. I had heard it secondhand. I mean, I didn't hear it from anybody who was actually physically there or that knew that. But then, I mean, Ralph, what year was that? I don't even know. It had to be a long time ago.
I don't know, but I am sure if you get off, when we get off, we just talk to our smartphone and say, Gil Hodges denied Hall of Fame, Ted Williams, Roy Campanella, and boom, we'll come up with a story from the New York Times or somewhere that'll verify we're saying. And that's just I'm just saying why he wasn't in, and I don't mean to make a big thing about it, but on one hand, on another hand, I do. But let me throw some names at you that should be in along with Gil. How about Buck Williams? Buck O'Neill.
Buck O'Neill.
Yeah.
Buck O'Neill, absolutely.
O'Neill. I mean, absolutely. He was called the Lou Gehrig of the black leagues, of the old Negro leagues. He was the first black to become a big league coach with the Cubs in '62. He was an ambassador to the game, and not that they haven't voted a bunch of Negro League players in who you just simply never heard of. He was a guy that stood out, and I think holding him back, along with Minnie Minoso, he's another guy that comes to mind. You can make a case that for some sort of racism there. I'm not, accusing anybody of that, but hey.
Plus, he was such a goodwill ambassador to baseball. He really was.
absolutely. And I think they knew what they did, that they made a mistake, and they ended up building a statue of him right outside of the hall. And I don't think that it ever hit them that the idea of the statue being outside of the hall just embellishes the idea that he couldn't be inside the hall. That's
right.
it.
Not right.
All right, and I'll just name one guy who shouldn't be in, and that's Walter O'Malley. And I'll name two, Tom Yawkey. But that's where I throw that.
And your reasoning for O'Malley is?
My reasoning for O'Malley is that in the name of greed, he, the most profitable National League owner at the time, at the name of greed, he broke hearts of children. How about that? If nothing else, he broke, because he was just looking for more money. It wasn't like he didn't have as much as God before that. He was looking for more money, and that's why he broke the heart, not only children, but adults. And not me, because I was a Giant fan. Giants were going to be gone either way. I'm thinking about the very, very passionate Brooklyn fans. Now, they are the most, if you compare them to the old New York Giant baseball team, they're 5-1 on any thread. They outnumber in their nostalgia thing, and it just broke a lot of hearts for greed. And it was he wasn't the only one doing stuff like that, but he was the poster boy.
Well, Robert Moses had a lot to do with that too.
Right.
You know, the great maven of New York roads and highways, and he didn't want Ebbets Field anymore. He didn't want to open a new stadium anywhere else.
Well, he wanted to go to. They offered him where Shea Stadium is now.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm the Brooklyn Dodgers." As if, you know what? Brooklyn, Queens, you go across the thing. They were already playing in New Jersey. They were playing part of their season in New Jersey. That he was just looking for a way out, and he was looking for a way out long before '56. Peter Trunk needs to be on the show, a great Dodger historian who will trace the timeline. And
oh yeah, I mean, I wasn't meaning
not to say that Robert Moses didn't have a negative effect on it all. But,
well, that was my point. I wasn't trying to say it was Moses who pushed them out, but there was a lot of pressure from Moses and people like him to get
and
rid
I
of
will
that.
say why Yawkey shouldn't be in is that there is no doubt in my mind that the man was a racist. And not that he wasn't you could say, was he a product of his time? Yes. But there were folks that supersede, and there are folks in every generation that transcend the product of their time bullshit.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah.
And I would have expected him as a human being who controlled lives and didn't. They could have signed Willie. They could have signed Jackie.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, and they didn't, because the guy, they denied him the right to play only because he was black. Only because. And this was after Jackie came in. And to throw Pumpsie Green in there in 1959, you ready for that one? Whereas people like Vec were winning, who were open to blacks helping them. Larry Doby, Satchel Paige, 1948, boom, they win it all. So, what are we talking about? Why should a guy like Yorkie be in? And I'll throw that question to all three of you. Why should he be in, starting with George?
Well, I'm not saying he should be. I don't really know, but I do. I agree with you, Ralph. I have to think on the evidence. You could say he was a racist because, Pumpsie Green certainly didn't compare ability-wise to, Larry Doby and Jackie and all that. On the other hand, I really don't have knowledge of Yorkie as a person. He and Ted Williams had quite a relationship, and a lot of Boston, people, Yorkie Way is right there at Fenway Park. So, I really can't say. I don't know. Maybe David and Ronnie can chip in more about it, but
let me
Yorkie.
give you one thing. Didn't he help in taking Lou Perini's lead in the Joey? What is it called? The charity that.
Because Ted Williams was very big in that.
Wait,
the Jimmy Fund. Yeah.
Jimmy
Fund. Yeah.
Yes. And when the Braves left Boston, it was Perini's baby, and Yorkie took it over. And I will give him a lot of credit for so doing.
Well, if that was the case, yeah. If Perini left and the Jimmy Fund was associated with Boston and the Red Sox were the only team left, and so Yorkie assumed it, and then, Ted Williams got involved, and they certainly did raise millions and millions of dollars for children's cancer research over the years.
And no one more active in that than Ted Williams. So if it seemed like
he was
him for being a little snide with Gil Hodges' situation, I want to tell you that man was generous in his time. And we look back; it was Memorial Day a few weeks ago, and you think this was a guy who flew with John Glenn. He was literally a war hero when it was more important than your batting average at that time. And should be forever.
Well, it was, and Ted, as we've talked before, Ted and Jerry Coleman, those two guys, they fought in two wars. Coleman flew, jets in Korea, but he also was in World War II. Now, Ted Williams did not fly in World War II. He was an instructor, but he did fly in Korea and almost lost his life when he got hit by ground fire, and John Glenn had to help him get back, give him directions on how to get back, and he crash landed the plane and jumped out before it exploded and all that kind of stuff. So, Ted Williams was a very complex individual. He was obstinate, he was vulgar. On the other hand, he did stuff like the Jimmy Fund for kids. A lot of the times he did it on his own. He didn't want any publicity for it. And he was a terrific, probably the greatest hitter that ever lived. If you look and say, okay, the guy hit 406 in 1941, how many years ago was that? And he was also a tremendous sportsman. He was a world-class fly fisherman. So, Ted Williams, unfortunately, the last year of his life and the controversy with his family, it's been an awful way to end his career.
Terrible.
With people thinking about that. But he was, to me, he was a real patriot. He and Feller and Greenberg and Buddy Lewis and Cecil Travis. These guys, they put their lives in harm's way.
You bring up a good point about Travis and Buddy Lewis, and it irked me the other day when I was watching some of the ceremonies for Memorial Day, and I think it was Bob Costas, whom I cannot stand as an announcer, but in any case, because he thinks he knows the world, and he's always willing to give you statistics that he'll tell you several times during the course of a 9-inning game. But the point is, he mentioned, the great World War II heroes, Hank Greenberg and Ted Williams, but he didn't mention the guys that were really fighting, like Buddy Lewis. And the guy could have at least done some research. There were a number of ball players who never reached the caliber of Ted Williams or Hank Greenberg, but they still put their lives on the line during the wars, and they just passed over them. It's just these two guys went out there to win World War II.
David, and I agree with that. And there's also, somebody wrote to me and they said, well, Memorial Day was just for those who were killed, and I mean that's the celebration. But to me, it's anybody who put their lives on the line.
Sure.
You recognize them for what they did, and certainly, Cecil Travis and Buddy Lewis, they were two guys who they weren't the caliber of Ted Williams and Greenberg, no, but they were American Major League ball players who interrupted their careers and faced actual combat. And then you had two other guys, and probably the general public, they've never heard of Bert Shepard and they've never heard of Lou Brissy. But here's two guys who were wounded in World War II and came back to pitch in the major leagues.
Yeah, I agree with you, George. It just irked me so much that they would not mention a couple. Do a little research. Right. You're gonna do a show on Memorial Day weekend. Do some research. Just don't think off the top of your head and mention Greenberg and Ted Williams.
Okay. Well, I think Costas does it because the general public, they remember Greenberg and Ted Williams, but you mentioned Buddy Lewis, Cecil Travis, it look like you're from Mars. Well, I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And when we're honoring people on Memorial Day, don't forget the survivors, the wives and children of those.
Sure.
Right. What we also forget is, and because the war is now 70 some odd years behind us, and I caught a hold of this while I was doing the research for the Nats and the Grays. During the war, right up to almost the end, we didn't know who was going to win. Now it's a forgiven fact, of course, but there was such anxiety all over the country, all over the world. There were movies made to boost morale simply because we didn't know. We might have lost the war.
Right.
It could have happened.
David, I agree with you. In the early days, even in the middle part of the war, it was very questionable.
Yeah.
Who was going to win? And you looked at Europe and the havoc that Hitler was doing over there, and you look at the Japanese imperialism and what was happening. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that we were going to win.
That's right.
And I agree with you.
It was terrible start we got off to with Pearl Harbor.
Absolutely.
We were destroyed. There has been talk. And this is a lot of talk, basically, that FDR knew that Pearl Harbor was coming. It was a way to draw us into the war, but he didn't know the severity. Mr. Hubler, I'll ask you, have you heard that?
Oh yes, I've heard that. I've also heard the counter argument that he wanted the U.S. to enter World War II, but he did not know that it would, about Pearl Harbor in advance. I can't imagine any president. Well, I can with one exception, but who would allow that to happen purposefully to bring us into a war?
You could say, how about Bush Jr., who brought us into...
Well, I think he fell under the influence of really bad intelligence, the point is that Pearl Harbor...
Dad?
No, well, There were things that his dad knew that he never talked about either. George Sr., Papa Bush, he knew that, for example, he knew Noriega was deeply involved in the drug trade in Panama because everybody knew it.
They would sniff together at a speech. They'd stand up there when Noriega came to town, and you go, and Noriega, go back, play the tapes on YouTube. Noriega would go, nice to meet you. That's definitely with that one.
Well, I mean, everybody in Panama knew it.
Pardon me?
I said everybody in Panama knew he was up to his nose, literally, in drug trafficking. But I remember when Bush was running for president, he said, we had no knowledge that he was involved. Well, if you knew anything about Panama in those days, you knew that everybody was
I deny it all, and if anything comes up, I deny that too. How about that? That's pretty nice. America. It's weird. There was an interesting post on Facebook today or yesterday about the severity of the prospect of Pence being president. That he's more
he's worse than Adams.
Yes.
Now there's a guy who should never get into the Hall of Fame. I would boycott that. I mean, I think we're getting really far.
You're not a voter, David.
We are, but let me say one thing about Bush to bring it back to baseball. He was the first baseman of Yale.
Yes, he was. Papa Bush.
In the early 40s. And reportedly a pretty good ball player.
Yeah, when he was vice president, I was over at the executive office building for he brought in what was his name? Gary Carter. Gary Carter was there with the vice president, and they were making presentations to these little league kids from Okinawa or someplace, and the two of them were having this high old time because Bush really he still is maybe a real baseball fan, and he and Gary Carter really had you could see that they were really quite a friendly pair who really enjoyed each other's company.
Well, you know what, George Bush, he was a first baseman for Yale, 47 and 48 when they went to the first two College World Series, and he played for Ethan Allen, who developed the All-Star baseball game, and there is that famous photograph of George Bush and Babe Ruth in 1948, just taken a couple months before Babe died. And George Bush was an excellent player. Matter of fact, I never saw it, but I heard that in the Oval Office, in his desk, he kept his first baseman's mitt.
Really?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I was only told that. I don't know it for a fact, but I just thought it was very interesting because that just showed, to me how much, baseball was part of his life.
Babe Ruth is a very famous picture, and I'm sure it's out there if you Google this one. It's an image of Babe Ruth going to Yale and meeting Bush.
Right.
A picture of them together that stands out in my mind.
When Bush was a student there?
That's the one I was referring to, Ralph.
Bush
that was
the
1948.
of the team, and he greeted Babe Ruth, who at that time was very sick as well. He had the camel hair's coat on that he wore right before he died a lot in pictures, and that's out there too. So baseball and politics mix.
Well, we ought to get Paul Dixon on here one day just to talk about the relationship between presidents and baseball, because he wrote a book about it, and there's some really interesting stories there, not just throwing out the first ball, but other stories about how many presidents really enjoyed the game, even if they didn't play it at a high level. It would make an interesting show.
Very true. It's very true. Yeah, they did.
Okay.
There is a photograph I've seen, and matter of fact, I met him 2 years ago down in Washington of Jim French, who was a catcher with the Expansion Senators, in the locker room at the RFK Stadium with his. They called him in. He was shaving to meet President Nixon, and because Nixon, as much as you can be pro or con on his, abilities and all that he did for the country or against the country, but he was a huge baseball fan.
Yes,
he was. Yes,
football too.
He and his son-in-law, Ike's grandson.
Yeah,
right.
David
would talk baseball endlessly, and there's a book called The Book of Lists by Wallace Walchensky and Walchensky.
That's right. Yep.
His two kids went back to the original name, and they compiled a list of stuff. And Ike Jr. or whatever his name is,
David Eisenhower. Yeah, David.
Their lists of ball players is in that book, as I recall. It's been years. It was a great boon to the way things were put together in literature. I think that book. So
no, I think that whole notion, that whole business about the presidents throwing out the first ball, I think it's been lost. It's a chapter in baseball history that really deserves to be resurrected. And unfortunately, our last several presidents have shown very little interest in baseball, and it's been difficult for them to even do. I mean, I was at the game when George W. Bush threw out the first pitch. He was so encumbered by this bulletproof vest that he wore over his Nats jacket that he could barely throw the ball at all. And of course, the boos rained down from the rafters, so to speak, and he was not well received. But still, he did it. I think he only did it once, and that was the first year that they were playing at the new stadium. But
I think you're right, David. He did. He did it from the pitcher's mound. Where
he did it from there. I was there. Yeah,
it wasn't an opening day. It was the opening day for the ballpark.
Yes, right.
But what you and I have talked about many times is the opening day tradition in Washington, and the fact is that I had footage of FDR and Truman and Ike and Kennedy, throwing out the first ball. But what they did, they threw it from the presidential box out onto the field.
Right.
And the players would scramble, and whoever got the ball would then take it to the president for his autograph. Right.
Yeah, that's right. And then there'd be pictures of the player and the president in the paper the next day.
That was part of the tradition, long standing in Washington, that was lost, after the ball club left.
Yeah,
and, then what you're talking about with Bush, he got up there on the mound, and that was a risk. But in the old days, and I have photographs of Kennedy and Johnson, president and vice president, standing right next to one another in the presidential box when he's throwing out the first ball. Now, can you imagine? If you look at today and say with all the terror and all the craziness that goes on. Here you've got the two leaders of our country standing right next to one another.
Right.
Well, that's what you see now. I mean, Pence is never more than a step and a half behind Trump. Just always they're together. I mean, no matter what it is, opening a supermarket, they're standing there together. It's remarkable.
Hey guys, can I tell a presidential story that isn't baseball but football?
Sure.
I grew up in New York, as you guys well know, and Columbia played at Bakersfield.
Bakersfield, right.
Bakersfield, right.
And it was the year Ike becomes president. He was the former president of Columbia right before becoming president of the United States. And I'm at a game as a kid, and Army comes in to play Columbia, and Ike goes from one side on first half. He was on one side of the field, and the second half on the other side. They made a big ceremony of that because obviously he was an Army guy and a Columbia guy. So, and I remember seeing that as a kid, and don't remember who won the football game, but
yeah, I saw a number of those. It was really funny because the entire Corps of Cadets, on the years that they played Navy, the Corps of Midshipmen would come, and the entrance to Baker Field, one of the entrances, the main entrances that fans went in, was actually on the end of like an ordinary residential street with 5-6-story apartment buildings lining both sides of the street. And I remember distinctly being there one year. It was so funny because here comes the entire Corps of Cadets. Can you imagine this in your neighborhood? All of a sudden, you wake up on a Saturday morning, and there's the entire Corps of Cadets marching right down in front of your door. And they marched into Baker Field. And they did this each year with whichever team was playing there. They didn't do it with the ordinary college teams, but the Army and the Navy got the parade into the stadium. And I always thought, because I lived in an apartment building like the ones that were on that street. And I could never imagine just sort of opening the window on a Saturday morning and seeing maybe a Corps of 1,000 cadets marching.
Right, they had 4,000. I mean, that had to be really impressive, David, because when you see
it was very impressive.
When they make their entrance, both the Corps and the midshipmen, it's very impressive to see the whole field covered by our young warriors.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, can I give you guys something impressive looking out of your apartment floor building one day on 91st Street in Jackson Heights? I'm looking out the 4th floor window, and there comes Jessica Walters. I don't know if you remember her. She played with Clint Eastwood in Play Misty for Me. Huh. And she had legs that went all the way up to Canada. And she's walking down the street. I'm hanging out the window because I happen to know that her grandmother lived on the 6th floor of the building I lived in. So it was a race to the elevator. That's as impressive, though, for a look out the window as would be all those midshipmen and their grandmothers.
Yes. Well, my parents told me that they had friends who lived in the apartment building where one of Babe Ruth's girlfriends lived in, and they were there a couple of times when that big saloon car he had, that big what was it, a twin six, I forget what
Packard or something.
Packard, yeah, Packard, thank you. Right, would pull up, and the Babe would get out, and everybody's window would be open because they were watching him get out of and he'd go wave, and my parents said he'd wave to everybody, and then he'd go into the building, and we'd come out maybe an hour and a half later, and wave again and take off.
He just stopped by for a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah, it must have been that. Yeah, for directions to the stadium.
I got one more quick story. Speaking of heroes who get adulates wherever they go, Nolan Ryan. I was the Tops rep in Visalia, and Nolan Ryan's kid was a player, and I had to go down there to have him sign the contract with Tops. So I'm hanging in the dugout way before the game, waiting for the players. He wasn't the only one to sign this, that, and the other thing. And there comes Nolan Ryan with a parade of people following him. Ball players, groundskeepers, blah, 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 blah. And it was just like one of those moments, like with the Babe. You see, and this is Visalia, California, a minor league little town in the valley, and there are players of every generation that have that certain something that they're going to follow. No one like the Babe, though. That did he have a good time?
Well, he came out smiling. I was told.
He was larger than life, and we talked. I think it was last week about Lou Gehrig really was in his shadow all the time because Lou was so quiet and reserved, and Babe was just the other way. I mean, he wanted to have his face in front of the public and eat hot dogs and drink beer and play with the kids and do all the kind of stuff that he did. He was just a larger than life individual.
Yep. That's why I urge you, if you haven't seen it, to get that watch that. I think it was HBO. Showtime did that biopic about Babe Ruth, a documentary. It was very, very good. It was done back in the 90s, and several of the talking heads, of course, have passed on since then. But it's still worth seeing. It's really very good.
Hey, one more survey then. I'll start with Ronnie. Did the Babe Ruth call really happen, or was that a myth?
I think it was a myth.
Okay. David?
I think he made some sort of gesture. I really do. Yeah. But whether he was calling his shot, I find that a little dubious. There are, there are many, many myths about Babe Ruth, the legend. So I think whatever that signal was, he took it to the grave because he never denied it, but he never really came out. And then there was one fellow I did meet who was a photographer, and he took some of the more famous shots of Babe Ruth, and he said, he signaled that he was going to hit it there. So you never know.
Hey,
it's a good story.
It's a good story. People took to the grave without ever denying.
Mm-hmm.
Never acknowledging, but never denying. Interesting. George, may I ask you?
Well, I agree. I think he was gesturing. It could be construed that he was pointing to center field, but the story I had is that they were, the Cubs were giving him a hard time, and so he was gesturing back at him, and so it just so happened that maybe he pointed or said, "I'm going to hit one out," and whether or not he called it, but I agree. I mean, it was a wonderful story, and it will be there forever because we'll never know. And nobody will ever know. I mean, the footage I've seen has been footage of him at the plate making some kind of a gesture, but from the angle, I think you can't tell whether he's pointing to the outfield or pointing into the Cubs dugout. It's just, but it's a wonderful story and a story that'll be part of baseball legend and lore. That's for sure.
Well, another small World Series legend that is much not nearly as well known about Babe Ruth is that Ruth is the only player to end a World Series by being thrown out trying to steal second base. And one of the few World Series that the Yankees lost, this was one of them.
David, I've heard that story. To me, it's hilarious because when you think about it, Babe Ruth trying to steal second base. I mean, that's bizarre.
Well, they say he was faster than he looked.
Yeah, but you know what? His job was not to steal second base.
I know, and of course, I think he surprised everybody by taking off. Yeah. But he was thrown out. That's a fact.
Yeah. I don't think he ran on a signal. I think he ran on his own.
Oh, I think you're right, George. Oh, absolutely. That's why everyone was so shocked.
Right.
I thought of Babe Ruth. He was a pretty good outfielder, if I'm not mistaken. I want you guys...
How was he as a pitcher?
Oh, he was a terrific pitcher.
Oh, he would have made the Hall of Fame, they say.
Yeah. I mean, he still holds a couple of records, pitching records.
Yeah, he was a terrific pitcher, and I think I've also seen the stats. I mean, he only pitched like 5 times after they converted him to become a full-time outfielder. But he was 5-0. The last 5 appearances as a major league pitcher, he was unbeaten.
Really?
Wow.
Huh.
Oh yeah.
Very interesting.
I have one more that I see, should not be in the Hall of Fame, is Keviston Mountain Landis, who's also in the Hall of Fame, which is a travesty. He was such a bigot.
Yeah, he was a bigot, but by the same token, he was able to bring baseball back after the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah.
I mean, he did manage to control things and keep them from going out of hand. And he took the job. I mean, it was nobody had ever had that job before. So
I think David, I agree with you, and he certainly was the right man at that time because he was given the to clean up the game, and that was the Black Sox scandal was such was such an awful mess. And so then, he was a judge, and, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and just so happened that, he was in office for the next 20-some years, until he died. So, whether or not he was a bigot or whether or not he was a racist, I mean, he was from Georgia. But on the other hand, his mission was to clean up the game, which he did. And, whether or not it's true about, the Black Sox and Joe Jackson, who knows, and being banned for life, these players on that team. But his job was to restore baseball, the integrity of the game, which is what he did.
Indeed. Hey, listen, Survey Says was pretty successful. And I've got 16 other questions. You hit 2 of them. So we'll always have something to talk about. Thank you, guys. This is, as usual, fun. And
this has been fun. It's been fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Always enjoy, Ronnie, talking to you and David and Ralph.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're going to be on a trip pretty soon, aren't you, George?
Yeah, we're going away. That's what I wanted to mention to you, Ralph. I mean, I will be around for the next couple of weeks, but my family and myself, we're fishermen, so we're going to go out to Montana and fish, and then up in.
Oh, wow!
Right. Yep. So.
Well, good.
Beautiful country.
All right.
Have a wonderful time.
All
right. Well, we'll talk
to Minneapolis on the way back.
What's that, Ronnie?
Stop in Minneapolis on the way back.
Matter of fact, I think we might change planes. I don't know, but that when we get into, I haven't been to Minneapolis in a long time, but as long as there's no snow on the ground, we might stop. So
it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Buy your lunch.
I know my dad really liked Minneapolis when he coached for the Twins because they were in Bloomington and they had a place, and I know there are a lot of lakes and stuff up there, so it's a great place to fish.
10,000 lakes.
Right.
Okay, I'll see you guys next week.
Okay,
guys.
All
right.
Yep.
Well, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon. Adios.